The first thing I noticed wasn't the scream in my headset. It was the sudden drop in altitude that shouldn't have happened. 1 second we were steady, cutting through cloud like butter, and the next the bird lurched hard to the left, alarms chirping like they were panicking. My co-pilot swore under his breath. I remember gripping the controls so tight my hands started to ache, eyes locked on the instruments, trying to make sense of numbers that didn't line up anymore. Outside, the windshield, the mountains were too close. Way too close. Dark rock, jagged ridgelines, and fog rolling in thick like it was alive, swallowing our landing lights. Then came the sound in the cabin, not mechanical, not radio static, something low and uneven, like weight shifting where no one was sitting. "Tell me you see that too," my co-pilot said. I didn't answer, because I did. And that was the moment I realized this wasn't a normal rescue run. Before I explain what we were carrying, you need to understand who I am, and why I never should have been on that flight in the first place. Asterisk, I've been flying rescue for a long time. Long enough that most missions blur together. Broken legs, lost hikers, hypothermia cases where every second counts and everyone's just trying to make it home alive. I'm not some weekend pilot chasing adrenaline. This is my job. Night ops, bad weather, tight terrain, that's my comfort zone. I've logged thousands of hours in mountain air, flown through storms that looked like they wanted to tear the sky in half, and pulled people out of places helicopters were never meant to reach. I fly by the book. Always have. Checklists, procedures, radio discipline, the stuff keeps you alive. You don't cut corners up there, not when the margin for error is basically zero. My crew trusts me because I don't panic and I don't improvise unless there's no other option left. That reputation matters in this line of work. It's the difference between getting the call and being grounded. That night was supposed to be routine. I remember thinking it felt almost too quiet before we launched. No rush, no chaos in dispatch, no frantic voices stepping over each other on the radio. Just another mission request, another set of coordinates, another check of fuel and weather. I'd flown that mountain range more times than I could count. I knew the wind patterns, the downdrafts, the way fog liked to sneak in without warning. If something was off, I usually felt it in my gut right away. But what still messes with me is how normal everything felt at first. I wasn't tired. I wasn't distracted. The aircraft was solid, the crew was sharp, and I was exactly where I was supposed to be. That's important, because it means what happened next wasn't some mistake, or stress talking, or my imagination running wild. People like to think pilots exaggerate stories after the fact. Add drama, add fear, make it sound bigger than it was. I don't do that. I've kept my mouth shut about plenty of things over the years because they didn't matter or because no one needed to know. This one's different. This one stuck. It followed me home, and the reason it matters is simple. I wouldn't be telling this story if the call had followed the rules. If it had come through the normal channels, with proper authorization and a clean paper trail, none of this would have happened. But that night, the call didn't follow procedure. And that was the first red flag I ignored. Asterisk, the call came in quieter than usual, which should have been my first real warning. No background noise, no overlapping voices in dispatch, no sense of urgency that usually comes with someone bleeding out on a ridge or freezing in a ravine. Just a calm voice, almost too calm, reading off coordinates like it was ordering takeout. I remember waiting for the rest of it, the injured count, the nature of the emergency, anything that would tell me what we were walking into. It never came. I asked the standard questions. Who's down there? What's the condition? Are we talking medevac or recovery? The answers were vague, clipped, like whoever was on the other end didn't want to say too much. They kept circling back to the same line. You're just picking something up. Not someone. Something. That word stuck in my head longer than it should have. Then there were the paperwork gaps. No agency stamp. No call sign I recognized. The request didn't route through the usual channels. Didn't ping the system the way it's supposed to. In my world, that doesn't happen by accident. There are rules stacked on rules for a reason. But before I could push back, the voice dropped a name. Not mine, but someone higher up the food chain. Someone who doesn't get mentioned unless you're being told, politely, to shut up and fly. I felt the pressure right then. Not yelled at, not threatened, just that quiet kind of pressure that tells you the decision's already been made. Launch now. Ask questions later. They said weather was closing fast, that if we didn't move, whatever was out there wouldn't make it through the night. Again, whatever my co-pilot gave me a look I'd seen before, the kind that says, this smells off, but are we really going to say no? And that's the messed up part. Saying no in rescue work feels wrong, even when your instincts are screaming. People depend on you. You don't want to be the reason someone doesn't come home, so I signed off on it. I told myself it was probably classified gear or a sensitive recovery, something they didn't want floating around on a radio channel. I've heard that excuse before. I wanted to believe it, but right before we lifted, dispatch came back one last time. Different voice. Lower, slower. They told us to keep the cabin clear and not to log anything beyond flight hours and fuel burn. No cargo description, no patient notes. We'll handle the rest, they said. That's when my gut finally dropped. Because once you're told not to write something down, you're already being dragged into it. Still, I brought the engines up to power and pointed the nose toward the mountains, telling myself I'd deal with whatever this was once we got there, not realizing that the mountains were already waiting. Asterisk, the moment we crossed into the mountains, the air changed. Not just turbulence, I mean the whole vibe. The kind you feel in your chest before your brain can explain it. The sky ahead went dull and flat, like someone had turned down the contrast on the world. Clouds stacked up tight against the peaks, heavy and low, dragging shadows across the rock like they were alive. Our landing lights barely cut through it. Everything felt closer than it should have been. The wind started doing weird things, pushing us sideways in short, ugly bursts. Nothing dangerous on paper, but enough to keep my hands locked on the controls. Mountain flying teaches you to respect what you can't see, and right then, I couldn't see much at all. The terrain warning system chirped once, then went quiet. Again, like it thought better of interrupting. Radio chatter faded the deeper we went. At first it was just static creeping in around the edges. Then whole transmissions dropped out mid-sentence. Dispatch tried to raise us, but their voices sounded stretched, warped, like they were coming through a long tunnel. My co-pilot tapped. The headset frowned and adjusted the gain. No change. I checked our instruments again. Airspeed steady, Engine temps normal. Fuel right where it should be. Everything said we were fine, and somehow that made it worse. Because when things go bad in the mountains, there's usually a reason. Ice build-up, downdrafts, mechanical gremlins. This felt like none of that. It felt intentional. Below us, the tree line thinned out fast, giving way to bare rock and narrow. Cuts that dropped straight into darkness. No roads, no lights. No sign anyone had ever been stupid enough to go wandering out there. Fog slid in thick and slow, curling around the nose of the aircraft, swallowing our reference points one by one. My co-pilot finally broke the silence, saying it felt like we were flying into a dead zone. I didn't answer right away, because I was staring at the GPS. The route line was still there, glowing, steady, but the surrounding terrain data started lagging behind us. Peaks popping in late, valleys smoothing out where they shouldn't. It was subtle, the kind of thing you only notice if you've stared at these screens for years. Then I glanced at the coordinates again. Same numbers dispatch had given us, same ones I'd punched in myself. But the longer we flew, the less they matched what was outside the glass. That's when the thought hit me. Cold and heavy. We weren't just deep in the mountains anymore. We were heading somewhere that didn't feel like it existed on any map. And when the target finally appeared on the display, I realized the real problem wasn't getting in or getting out. It was figuring out where, exactly, they had sent us. The spot we were headed to was marked on our GPS, sure, but the thing is, it didn't line up with anything on the maps we kept on hand. I pulled up every resource I had, checking satellite imagery, topographic charts, and the military overlays. They usually covered classified zones. Nothing, just blank space where our coordinates said we'd be touching down. No trails, no camps, not even a clearing. Just raw, jagged mountain slope. It's the kind of feeling you get when you're sure you're following a road, but suddenly you're driving straight into a brick wall. The GPS was dead certain this place existed, but every other tool screamed otherwise. It was like the mountain was playing tricks, folding in on itself to hide something. And for a pilot who's trusted instruments his whole career, that was more than unsettling. I asked the crew to double-check the inputs. No typo, no error. We were locked on a point that didn't belong anywhere on any map. The coordinates themselves looked normal, but their location, impossible. The terrain beneath us shifted too. The rock formations grew stranger older maybe. Sharp edges that didn't quite fit the usual erosion patterns, shadows that hung heavy and didn't change with the sun. It felt unnatural, like the ground was holding its breath. My co-pilot was quieter now. Usually, he's chatty, keeps me sane with jokes and radio banter. But this time, all I got was a nervous glance and "Are you seeing this too?" I nodded, though that didn't make it any easier. The wind died down like someone hit a switch. The silence inside the cabin grew thick, and even the engines felt distant. I tried calling dispatch again, but all I got back was static. It was like the mountain was swallowing our signals whole. That's when the realization hit me full force. We weren't just flying into a remote spot. We were heading somewhere that didn't want to be found. Places like that don't get marked on charts. For a reason. Usually, it's government stuff, secret bases, old mining shafts, military experiments gone sideways. But whatever this was, it wasn't on any known list. It was like a ghost on the grid. And that's when I started questioning every piece of information I'd been given, every instruction I'd been told to follow. Because this flight wasn't just off the map, it was off the radar in every sense. It was no longer about flying safe or fast. It was about getting in and out without losing more than just my aircraft. And that leads to the moment we finally saw what was waiting for us below. Something I still struggle to describe without feeling the cold grip of fear creeping back up my spine. Asterisk, as we got closer, the first thing that hit me was how wrong everything looked. The usual signs of human activity, no tracks, no fires, no signs of life were nowhere to be found. Instead, what we saw from the cockpit was like something out of a nightmare. The clearing ahead was shrouded in a thick, unnatural fog that clung low to the ground, swirling like it had a will of its own. The rocks around it were slick and dark, almost glistening as if wet, but there was no rain falling, not a drop. Then came the shape, something low and sprawling, half covered by a tarp or maybe some kind of fabric that fluttered without wind. It was too big to be an animal, but too misshapen to be machinery. The angles were all wrong, jagged edges here, smooth curves, they're like a broken puzzle no one wanted to finish. The light from our landing gear barely touched it, but it gave me enough to know this wasn't some forgotten piece of equipment left behind by previous crews. This was something else. Something alive, maybe, or once alive. My co-pilot's voice was low when he asked if I wanted to turn back. I wanted to say yes, more than anything, but we both knew that wasn't an option anymore. We were committed. The fog seemed to thicken right as we descended, wrapping the aircraft in a cold blanket that seeped through the seams. Our radios crackled, with static like a bad radio drama, the only sound besides the dull roar of the engines. That's when I noticed the shadows moving slow, subtle, just at the edge of the fog. They weren't human, not quite. Too tall, too slow, too deliberate. Like they were watching us, waiting. I tried to catch a better look, but every time I blinked or shifted, they seemed to vanish, leaving only an empty space behind. I called down to the crew, telling them to stay alert and ready. Everyone was tense, silent except for the soft clicks of equipment checks. The air inside the cabin had gone cold, and no one said a word about it. It was like we'd stepped into a different world, one where the rules didn't apply anymore. That moment, the first real look at what we were sent to pick up, is etched in my mind. It wasn't just strange, it was wrong. And that feeling stayed with me, crawling under my skin as we prepared to make the pickup. But what happened next? Well, that's where things got even darker. Asterisk hovering there, just above that eerie clearing. The tension was so thick you could have cut it with a knife. The whole crew was on edge, no jokes, no small talk, just the steady hum of the rotors and the weight of what we were about to do pressing down on us. The cargo hook was ready, the winch was prepped, but none of that mattered, because what we were lifting wasn't cargo like I'd dealt with before. This was something else entirely. Something I couldn't shake. The feeling wasn't supposed to be touched. The ground crew, or whoever they were, had left minimal set up just enough. Ropes and pulleys to hold whatever was under that tarp. We didn't have a lot of time. The fog was creeping in fast, and visibility was dropping by the second. I remember looking down, trying to catch a glimpse beneath the cover, but the fabric barely moved, like it was weighing the air itself down. As the winch operator slowly lowered the cable, a chill ran through me. The moment the hook latched on, the whole machine seemed to shift. The weight was uneven, heavy on one side, pulling the helicopter just enough to make me fight the controls. It wasn't just mass, it felt alive in a way that I can't fully explain. Like something was resisting being taken from its hiding place. We started the lift. Slow and steady, but the fog thickened like quicksand, swallowing the edges of the clearing. My instruments flickered for a moment, altimeter, compass spinning weirdly, but I kept my focus. My co-pilot's face was pale, eyes darting between the instruments and the load dangling beneath us. The air around us seemed to grow colder, and the noise inside the cabin dropped a notch. No radio static, no engine hum, just an eerie silence. That pressed against my eardrums. I caught a glimpse of movement below, shadows shifting in the fog, like watchers who didn't want to be seen but couldn't look away either. Once we got the cargo secured and pulled in close, the weight shifted again. The temperature inside the cabin seemed to drop further, my breath fogging up the glass despite the heater on full blast. I caught my co-pilot swallowing hard. That was when I knew, whatever this was, it wasn't just dead weight. We pulled away from that spot faster than I usually would. No leisurely exit from the mountains this time. The fog clung to us like a bad dream, and every second felt like we were carrying something we had no right to touch. I still don't know what exactly. We hauled up that night. All I know is, once it was on board, nothing about that flight was the same anymore. Asterisk. Right after we lifted off, things started feeling off, and not in the usual way you expect turbulence or mechanical issues. It was subtle at first, like a whisper in the back of your mind telling you something wasn't right. The load beneath us shifted occasionally, but it wasn't just weight moving. It was almost like it was alive, reacting to the helicopter's every motion. The co-pilot caught it too, his eyes flicking down every few seconds like he was trying to figure out what the hell was going on without saying it aloud. Then the radios, which had been quiet since we left the clearing, started spitting static that sounded almost like murmurs. Nothing clear, just low, unintelligible sounds that made the hairs on my neck stand up. Every time I tried to reach dispatch, all I got was that same eerie static. It felt like we'd dropped out of normal airspace, even though the instruments said otherwise. My instruments themselves began acting strange. The compass swung wildly. The altimeter flickered in ways that didn't make sense, given our altitude. And the cabin temperature plummeted despite the heater blasting. I could see my breath fogging the glass, and the chill wasn't just from the cold outside. It was something deeper. The crew started getting quiet, too quiet. No more jokes or chatter to break the tension. The air felt heavy, like the cabin was holding its breath alongside us. At one point, I caught my co-pilot staring out the window. At nothing, his jaw tight, eyes wide like he was seeing something no one else could. I wanted to ask what he saw, but the words caught in my throat. There was a moment when the helicopter shuddered unexpectedly. Not like a mechanical hiccup, but like a pulse traveling through the frame. It rattled us, and for a second, I swear, felt the load respond almost, like a heartbeat syncing with ours. The noise inside the cabin dropped to a near silence, and all I could hear was the thudding of my own heart pounding in my ears. I tried to keep control, to focus on flying us safely out of the mountains, but the atmosphere had shifted. What we were carrying wasn't just cargo, was something that didn't belong in this world, and it was making its presence known. That flight back wasn't just a journey. It was a descent into something I still can't fully explain or understand. Every minute felt like walking on the edge of a knife, where one wrong move could plunge us into something darker than any mountain storm I'd faced before. What awaited us at the end of the flight was just as strange the place where we were. Supposed to land, but no one was there to meet us. We landed in the usual Sparta, small clearing near the edge of the base that was supposed to be waiting for us. But the place was dead quiet. No trucks rolling up, no crews in hazmat suits or military personnel hustling to unload whatever secret package we were supposed to deliver. Just empty air and the faint buzz of distant generators. The runway lights flickered weakly, struggling against the darkness creeping in. I checked the clock. Right on schedule, but there was no sign anyone knew we were coming. The radio crackled once or twice with background noise, but no actual voice came through. It was like the whole place was abandoned, or maybe it never existed the way we thought. I called dispatch again, but still nothing but static. No confirmation, no instructions, nothing. My co-pilot and I exchanged looks that said everything without words. We knew we weren't supposed to be here without a ground crew, but the orders were clear: drop off the cargo and leave. No questions. No delay. We wheeled the cargo bay door open, and I felt that familiar pit in my stomach, the kind of gut feeling that says you're about to mess with something you don't fully understand. The fog from the mountains had followed us down, curling around the edges of the landing pad like it had a life of its own. As we moved the package out onto the tarmac, the cold hit us hard. Not just the winter chill, but a biting cold that seemed to claw at your bones. It was unnatural. The tarp shifted once more, revealing glimpses of something pale beneath, but I looked away. Some things you don't want to see twice. We set it down where the coordinates told us to, but still no one came. No handshake, no acknowledgement, no official handoff, just silence. The kind of silence that makes you check over your shoulder, expecting to see eyes watching you from the shadows. Minutes stretched on. I called out over the radio one last time, half expecting an answer that never came. We were alone, completely alone. That's when the realization hit hard. This mission wasn't about a rescue or even a delivery. It was something else entirely. Something that was meant to stay hidden. Somewhere between the mountains and the shadows, where no one was meant to follow. We closed up, sealed the cargo bay, and took off into the night without a single word from anyone on the ground. And in that silence, I felt the weight of what we'd carried settle over me like a dark cloud. What happened next was something that no checklist or procedure could prepare me for. The log's what you'd expect to be a simple record of a mission had. An entry missing. The flight, the cargo, everything about that night simply didn't exist on paper. That's when things really started to get strange. After we landed and the engines finally wound down, I headed straight to the flight logs, like I always do. You'd think the paperwork would be the easiest part of a mission, right? Just numbers and times, signatures and checkboxes. But that night, it felt like stepping into a bad dream. I pulled up the digital logs, expecting to see every detailed takeoff. Time, coordinates, fuel usage, everything neat and tidy like always. But the mission wasn't there. No record of the coordinates, no mention of the cargo, no sign that we'd even flown that route. It was like the entire flight had been erased. I thought maybe it was a glitch, so I checked every system we had. Access to nothing, just a blank spot where our flight should have been logged. I asked the operations folks quietly, but their faces went stone cold the moment I mentioned the mission. "There's nothing here," one of them said flatly, "and you're not supposed to ask." And that's when the weight of it all really hit me. The silence from dispatch, the vague orders, the no-log policy, they weren't mistakes. They were intentional. Someone was covering tracks, making sure no one outside a very small circle knew what we'd picked up or where we'd gone. I sat there staring at the empty screen, feeling like I was part of something bigger and darker than I wanted to admit. The official channels had wiped away our mission, but I still had the memories, the sounds, the weight of that cargo, and the cold that never quite left the cabin after we lifted off. Trying to explain it to anyone outside the crew was impossible. Without records, it was just a ghost story one no one wanted to believe. And if the powers that be could erase the flight, what else could they hide? I realized then that this wasn't just about flying a secret mission. It was about being part of a silence meant to bury whatever we'd touched deep beneath layers of denial and fear. The deeper I dug, the clearer it became that some things are meant to stay hidden, and some questions are better left unanswered. But even with all that, there was one thing I couldn't shake, the warning I got afterward. Something that told me not to ask too many questions and to forget everything I'd seen. That's where things got even more unsettling. Asterisk. After the logs came up empty and the mission vanished into thin air, things got quieter than I ever expected. Not just on the radio or in the hangar, but with the people around me. It was like the air itself shifted, heavy and thick with unspoken rules. I started getting calls few and far between from voices that didn't identify themselves but made it crystal clear. Some questions didn't need answers, and some details were better left alone. They never came out and threatened me directly. No dramatic warnings or shouting matthews. It was all quiet, subtle. A casual, "you should forget what you saw here," an offhand, "keep your head down there." The kind of pressure that creeps in slowly and makes you doubt whether you should even be thinking about what happened. One night, after a long shift, a guy I barely knew pulled me aside in the mess hall. He didn't say much, just leaned in and said, "Some things aren't meant for daylight. You ask too many questions, you'll find yourself grounded for good or worse." That was it. No details, no explanations, just a warning wrapped in a quiet thread. I wasn't stupid. I knew exactly what grounded for good meant in our world. Jobs lost, records buried, a career quietly erased. The kind of punishment that doesn't make headlines but leaves you wondering why you ever got involved in the first place. I started watching my back, keeping my mouth shut in meetings and steering clear of certain conversations. Even my crew seemed to sense it. There were looks exchanged that said, "We all know, but we don't talk." The silence was louder than any shout. The whole thing felt like stepping into a shadow world, where facts bend and truths are replaced by silence. And the more I pushed for answers, the more the silence pushed back. There was one night in particular that stuck with me. I was alone in the hangar, running pre-flight checks on another run, when a voice came over the radio, not from dispatch, but somewhere else. Clear and calm, it said, "Forget the mountains. Forget what you carried. It's better for everyone." No signature, no call sign, Just that one chilling sentence. I didn't respond. I just sat there, heart pounding, knowing I'd crossed a line I couldn't uncross. That warning wasn't just about keeping secrets, it was about survival. Because some stories, some flights, they don't just disappear from the logs, they disappear from your life entirely if you don't toe the line. But there was one memory, one detail from that night, that refused to be buried with the rest of the story. That detail still haunts me. Asterisk, there's this one image that won't leave me, no matter how far I try to push it away. It's not the fog, not the shifting shadows, and not even the weight of that something hanging under the helicopter. It's the look I caught for just a second, right before the winch pulled that cargo up. I swear I saw ice cold, unblinking. And watching, they weren't human eyes, not really. Too big, too dark, almost glowing faintly in the mist. Like something that's been waiting a long time for someone to show up. The kind of eyes that don't blink because they don't need to. The kind that see everything, even when you think they're closed. I tried to shake it off at first. Told myself it was just a trick of the light, a reflection on the tarp, or maybe the way my brain was playing catch-up in that weird mountain fog. But every time I close my eyes, that stare comes back. It's the kind of look that gets under your skin and roots itself there, no matter what you do. What haunts me the most is the feeling behind those eyes, a silent warning, or maybe a challenge. Like whatever that thing was, it knew exactly who we were and why we were there. It wasn't scared, it wasn't pleading, it was just waiting. Since that night, I haven't been able to forget that moment. It's like a puzzle piece that doesn't fit anywhere else, a question that won't be answered. I've looked back at every detail of the flight, every strange sound and every glitch, trying to understand what we really picked up that night. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder if those eyes are still watching me, waiting for me to let go of the silence or to slip up and say something I shouldn't. And maybe that's the real weight I'm carrying. Not the physical load on the helicopter, but the memory of something that shouldn't exist and the knowledge that some things are best left alone. This whole experience changed me, though I don't say it out loud. It's hard to explain to people who haven't seen what I've seen or felt what I've felt. But every time I hear a strange noise or see a shadow out of the corner of my eye, that memory sneaks back in, reminding me that the mountains hide more than just rocks and trees. It's a reminder that the unknown is always closer than you think, and sometimes it's watching. Asterisk. There's something about nights like that when you've seen things you can't explain, flown places that don't exist on any map, and carried cargo that wasn't meant to be touched that sticks with you. It doesn't matter how many flights you've done or how many times you tell yourself it's just part of the job. That unease, that quiet fear never really leaves. I've learned to live with it, but every now and then it creeps back in. When the wind howls just right or the fog rolls in low, I get that same chill in my gut, the feeling that something's watching from the shadows. It's a reminder that some stories don't have neat endings, and some secrets aren't meant to be uncovered. Maybe it's better that way. Maybe some things should stay lost in the mountains, where they can't hurt anyone or be dug up by curious eyes. I can't say for sure what we carried that night or what it wanted, but I do know this. The world is bigger and stranger than we'd like to admit. So if you ever find yourself flying into the unknown, watch your instruments, trust your gut, And remember, some places don't want visitors, and some things don't want to be found. That's all I've got. Thanks for listening.